Hello and welcome to the ultimate first U-bass lesson. So I'm Professor Steven. As you can tell, I've got the tweed jacket, so that gives me credentials to call myself a professor. And we're just going to jump right into it. So we've got a lot of stuff to cover today. I'm going to try to go through all of that and then answer your questions at the end. So it's going to be a little bit different than normal. I'll be answering questions at the end of the stream rather than all throughout it. All right. So we're going to talk about how to hold the U-bass, some basic plucking techniques and fretting techniques. We're going to do some warm-up exercises, some scales. We're going to learn about arpeggios. We're going to learn some notes. We're going to learn how to play some simple bass lines, and then we're going to learn kind of where to go from there. So I'm trying to cover a whole lot in a short amount of time. So just bear with me on this. So first, I'm going to assume that you already have a bass ukulele or a U-bass. If you don't, you can always look at the review videos and other stuff to find that. But for now, we're going to go ahead and go along with this. You might have metal strings, you might have rubber strings, but most of this stuff will apply to everything. Pretty much all of this will apply to any bass ukulele that you have. So once again, I'm going to hold questions till the end, but I'm going to go ahead and go through all this stuff. So first, we need to know how to hold the U-bass. Well, you could hold it a variety of different ways, but here's what I typically like to do. And there are two little things about this that you can notice. One thing I like to do to get the U-bass at the angle that I like is I like to cross my right leg over my left leg. So that just brings it up just a little bit. If I don't have them crossed, it kind of sits a little bit lower. Right now it's not really sitting lower because I also have a strap to help. If you don't want to cross your leg over, I highly recommend getting a strap, because then you can adjust it to where you have the neck maybe at a 45-degree angle. And I think with the strap is really the only way you can get it quite at 45 degrees. You can see from like the bottom of the screen how sometimes it's like this, but really ideally it's like that. And you also could have it a little bit higher if you want to with the strap. So if you like having it up here, that's fine. But we don't really want the neck to be like that. We want it a little bit up so we can reach everything. So now we've got a basic idea of how to hold the U-bass. If you have any questions about it, let me know. I might answer stuff pertaining to the lesson that we're talking about. But that's the basic idea on how to hold it. Typically what I do then is I have my right arm either resting on the body up here or kind of floating in front where I'm not putting a whole lot of pressure on my arm either way. A tiny bit might be necessary to keep the angle right, but you don't want to be pushing down real hard or anything. Your arm might go to sleep, or if you're plucking and doing that, it might lead to some wrist issues. So now let's talk about the right hand plucking. So I typically use my pointer finger and my middle finger. You can start with just one. And what I do is I play upward through the strings. Right now, I'm not worried about anchoring my thumb, but you could anchor your thumb to the front of the bass. You could anchor your thumb on top if you wanted to, but that makes it hard to reach some of the furthest away strings like the G string. So what I typically like to do is I kind of have my thumb floating a little bit, or sometimes it'll be resting against the body up here when I'm playing the E string. And then you could leave the thumb there and be able to play all these other notes. But if you're trying to play fast, stretching your hand out actually slows you down a little bit. So what I do to get around this is I anchor my thumb on the E string when I'm playing any other string other than the E string. Or sometimes I'll even have my thumb come over like this, and then it automatically mutes the E string and maybe even the A string as you're coming down. So this is called the floating thumb technique. So we can use that to kind of move up and down and then just let it float literally up here. If you can see what my thumb's doing, how it's not anchored against anything when I'm playing the E string. But then as I go down, it kind of touches the other strings just to mute them a little bit. So that's an option that you can do. It's adapted from six-string playing and other playing like that. So that's basically how you pluck. Then we're just going to pull our fingers through the strings like that. And you can either like move your hand through the string to get it to go if you're just doing slower notes, or you can just, move your fingers like that. I think about it like you're kind of pulling the string a little bit and releasing it. You don't have to pull hard and you probably want to hit it a little bit lighter on the rubber strings, because if you pull it like that, you'll probably get some fret buzz. We're just going to play through the strings like that. So what I want you to try to do is play index, middle, on each string. So let's do it together. 1, 2, 3, 4. Index, middle, index. Let's go to the A string. Index, middle, index, middle. Let's go to the D string. Index, middle, index, middle. Then the G string. Index, middle, index, middle. So now that we've got that down, let's focus on what the left hand is going to do. So we can play open strings like that, but when we're playing with our left hand, we're going to be pushing down between the frets, which are these pieces of metal. And you don't want to push down right on the piece of metal, but you may want to be just behind. And when I say behind, I mean closer to the headstock rather than to the body. Sorry, closer to the body rather than the headstock, but just behind one of the pieces of metal. So if you're behind the first piece of metal in that square, you'd be pushing down, playing the first fret. And you want to hold it down while you pluck. And here's the thing a lot of beginners struggle with is right after they pluck, a lot of times people want to let go with the left hand, and we really need to hold the left hand down as long as we want the note to ring out. Because as soon as you let go of that note, it stops. So it's some basic stuff, but it's easy to overlook stuff like that. So you want to hold it down. If you want to hold a note out for 2 beats, for instance, you could go 1, 2, and then let the note go. All right. So that's with our pointer finger. I want to mention that I'm not pinching the note. I'm basically pulling with my arm, just lightly pulling into the neck, and I'm using my thumb to stabilize, not to squeeze. If you squeeze a whole bunch, you'll have pain in this part of your hand over time. It won't happen immediately, but from repetition, it could happen. So you want to kind of pull into the neck as you play, rather than squeezing and thinking about it as pinching really hard or something. Play really lightly, stay relaxed, and think of it as more like pulling into the neck rather than squeezing. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to play 1 finger per fret. And what I mean by this is our pointer finger will get the first fret. So let's just stay on the G string for now. We'll pluck the first fret on the G string. Then we're going to use our middle finger on our fretting hand to hold down the 2nd fret on the G string still. Then we'll play the 3rd fret, and then we'll play the 4th fret. And notice how I use my ring finger for the 3rd fret and my pinky for the 4th fret. So now that we've done that on 1 string, we want to practice doing that 1, 2, 3, 4 on every string. So let's start on the E string so we can go to one of the harder strings to play. So we have to reach all the way up. Notice that when I'm doing this, I kind of keep my hand curved but relaxed. And so then that way I can play the 1st fret, 2nd fret, 3rd fret, and 4th fret, not by really squeezing, but more pulling into the neck. Okay. So right now, don't worry about which fingers you're plucking with. You could pluck with the index or the middle finger. We're just going to go all the way through. And this is basically warm-up exercise 1. I have a video on my beginner playlist that goes more in depth on this if you want to. We're just going to go through it kind of quickly. So index on the 1st fret on the E string. Now we're going to play the 2nd fret. That's our middle finger. Then our ring finger is going to get the 3rd fret. And our pinky is going to get the 4th fret. And we're going to move down to the A string. 1st fret, 2nd fret, 3rd fret, 4th fret. And once again, don't worry about the right hand right now. You could be plucking with 1 finger or you can be alternating. But if you're not going back and forth without missing one, don't worry about that for now. Now the D string, 1st fret, 2nd fret, 3rd fret, 4th fret. And then the G string, 1st fret, 2nd fret, 3rd fret, 4th fret. And just remember to stay relaxed with the left hand. And then with the right hand, like I said, you can either have your thumb float, you can have it resting on the E string while you're playing the other 3 strings, or you can have it kind of move along with you. So now we're going to combine alternating the right hand with that left hand. And this part's a little bit tricky. So basically what I do is I think about what the right hand needs to do while watching what the left hand is doing. So we know that the left hand's going in order from pointer finger all the way through to pinky, but our right hand, our plucking hand, is going to be alternating index, middle, index, middle, index, middle, index, middle on each string. So you're always starting on your index and then you're ending on the middle. Okay, so let's do this slowly. I'm going to say what this hand is doing, but I'm going to watch what this hand is doing this time. So index, middle, index, middle. Because this is easier, I'm just keeping track of what it's doing while visually seeing what my left hand is doing. And we're gonna swap them, swap what our focus is on after this. So let's do it together on the E string. Here we go. Index, middle, index, middle. Next string, index, middle, index, middle. Next string, index, middle, index, middle. Next string, index, middle, index, middle. So I'm just going to quickly say, hey, Robert, and hey, John, how are y'all doing? So that's the basic idea, and I was thinking about what this hand was doing. Now I'm going to look at this hand and focus on what that hand is doing. So I'm going to make sure this one's just doing index and middle in a row, and I'm going to think about, I'm going to say index, middle, ring, pinky to know what that hand is doing while I'm staring at this hand to make sure it's not messing up. So I'm going to go index, middle, ring, pinky, index, middle, ring, pinky, index, middle, ring, pinky, index, middle, ring, pinky. So you're always focusing on the hand that you're not looking at, basically, with thinking about the fingers. And that way you're isolating each part and hopefully getting all that together. Hey, John, how's it going? Sounds like I said, hey, John, twice. I should just say, hey, Charlie, but I'm sure your dog would be like, all right. So sorry about that. So basically that's the idea with this warm up. Like I said, there's another video that goes into more detail on that. But the reason we have to learn this first is because it's the idea of playing in a position, assigning our fingers to those frets for a specific pattern or specific length of time for specific songs. So sometimes you might be playing the first fret, second fret, third fret, and fourth fret with those fingers. Sometimes you might be playing the fifth fret with your pointer finger, the sixth fret with your middle finger, the seventh fret with your ring finger, and the eighth fret with your pinky on every string. So it doesn't really matter where you do that, but we want to kind of play in positions. And this is important for the next set of stuff, which is scale overviews. So basically, this is the overview of scales. Sorry, I'm reading off this paper. We're going to do major and minor scales today. And we're basically going to use that grid, that idea of locking our fingers down to a specific set of notes to play a scale pattern. So I'm going to play it first and then kind of explain what I'm doing. So here's a G major scale. All right. So first, we'd have to know where the G note is. We don't really need to know the rest of the notes in the scale to learn the pattern, although it's really a good idea to go back in and learn the notes, which we'll talk about soon. And you might be like, why learn scales? Why does every teacher always push scales on me? And so I'm going to give a couple of reasons why before we get into it. Basically, scales are the building blocks of melody and a lot of harmony things, like walking lines. We connect the dots with scales. We might outline chord tones or do this, that, and the other. But in general, when we want to get to one note to the other, we're going to like outline it with a scale. We might walk down to a note in the middle of a walk line, or we might walk up the scale. So we're just using little sections of a scale when we're walking, and you'll hear this very familiar sounding. And then with melodies, a lot of melodies borrow from the major scale, and some do the entire major scale without changing the order, without changing anything except the rhythm they play it with. So here's an example, Joy to the World. It's literally a descending major scale, so doing the major scale backwards, and it just has a different rhythm. And so that's why we want to learn scales, is they're everywhere. Pieces of them and the entire scales appear in so many songs. So what we're going to do the G major scale is we're going to assign our fingers to the second fret is your pointer finger notes. The third fret is your middle finger notes. The fourth fret is your ring finger notes. And the fifth fret is your pinky notes. So we're going to start with our middle finger on the third fret because that's a G note. And the reason we're not starting with our pointer finger is because we're going to have some second fret notes. So if we were to do that, we'd have to shift backwards and shift. When I say backwards, I mean shift side to side, where we really just want to assign our fingers to get those notes on each individual frets, like pointer fingers getting the second fret and so forth, middle finger getting all the third fret notes. Okay, so we're going to start on the third fret on the E string with our middle finger, and then we're going to go to the fifth fret on the E string with our pinky. Then we're going to go down to the A string. We're going to play the second fret, and that's going to be with our pointer finger. Then third fret with the middle finger, and then fifth fret with the pinky. Now we're going to move down to the D string, second fret on the D string, pointer finger. We're going to skip over to the ring finger this time, fourth fret on the D string, and then we're going to end on another note that happens to be a G. We're going to be playing the fifth fret on the D string. So now this is moving kind of fast. If anybody is confused about what's going on here, I do have a lesson on the major scale on that beginner playlist. I'm going to try to remember to link it below later on after the live stream. Good morning from the Philippines. Georgia, nice to, that's cool. Thanks for tuning in. Awesome. What time is it there? Is it 12 hours different than here, or is it a different time? Is it 7 or 8 a.m. or something? Very cool. Anyway, sorry, you can tell I get distracted easily, but we'll keep going. So that's our major scale pattern. Let's play it one more time. Third fret on the E string, fifth fret on the E string, then second fret on the A string, third fret, fifth fret, then the next string, second fret on the D string, fourth fret on the D string, and fifth fret on the D string. So I'm in the Eastern time zone in the United States, so it's literally that same time. It's 7:18 p.m. over here. So that's awesome. Okay, so now that we've got the major scale down, we're going to come back to that, but we're going to go to the minor scale pattern. Now, real quick, I do want to say that you can do this major scale pattern anywhere starting from the E or the A string. So like, let's say we wanted to start on the fifth fret on the E string, and we do the same finger pattern. So it wouldn't be the same frets at all. But it would be middle finger on that first note, then you're going over to your pinky, then the next string, you're going to go to your pointer finger, your middle finger, your pinky, then your pointer finger on the D string, your ring finger, and then your pinky. So we keep the fingers consistent, and then that way when we learn this pattern here, we can move it around and it becomes a new scale. So if we were playing the G major scale down here, if we started on the fifth fret and had our fingers assigned to the pointer finger to the fourth fret, middle finger to the fifth fret notes, ring finger to the sixth fret notes, and pinky to the seventh fret notes with the same finger pattern, then all of a sudden it becomes A major. So once again, if that's a little bit confusing, there's a whole video on this on that playlist. I think it's going to end up being the third video on there after I add this one as an overview. Okay, so the minor scale, we're going to start on our pointer finger instead of our middle finger because all of our notes are going to be ahead of the first note, basically. So if we were doing G minor, we're going to start on that third fret on the E string again, but this time we're going to be using our pointer finger instead of our middle finger. And that means that all our fingers are going to be, pointer finger notes are going to be all the third fret notes in the scale. The fifth fret notes are going to be gotten by the, I skipped over. There aren't going to be any 4th fret notes, but the middle finger would get the 4th fret notes if there were any. Then we're going to have the 5th fret notes, and the ring finger is going to get those. And then we're going to have the pinky getting all the 6th fret notes. Okay, so this is the minor scale. You can go backwards down if you want to. We'll just go up the scales for now to keep this short so we can move on to everything we've got to cover. So we're going to start with the 3rd fret on the E string with our pointer finger. Then we're going to get the 5th fret on the E string with our ring finger. Then the 6th fret on the E string with our pinky. We're going to do the same thing on the A string now. We're going to go to the 3rd fret, then the 5th fret, then the 6th fret. It's important to note what fingers we're using. We're using the index finger, the ring finger, and the pinky to get those 3 notes in order. And then we're going to go down to the D string, and we're going to hit the 3rd fret, and then we're going to hit the 5th fret with our ring finger. So notice my fingers are staying in that grid. We're not moving side to side. We're just staying where anytime it's a 3rd fret note, the pointer finger gets it, etc. I think I've said it a lot. Hopefully it's less confusing now. Okay. So let's do it one more time. This time I'm just going to tell you what fingers to use. So we're going to do pointer finger, ring finger, pinky. Next string, pointer finger, ring, pinky. Next string, pointer finger, and ring. And that's the end of the scale. At least a 1-octave scale, which is all we're doing today. All right. So those are the scales. From the scale, we can skip over certain notes and come up with what outlines chords, which if you hear like a guitar player or ukulele player playing chords, we want to know what individual notes make up those chords so that we know what notes we can pick from when we make up a bass line. So right now, we're not going to worry about the note names just yet, but we do want to talk about these arpeggio patterns. So we have a major arpeggio and a minor arpeggio. There are more. There is an arpeggio lesson. I think it's also on that playlist. If it's not, I'm going to add it to it probably by the time that you see this if you're not watching it live. So the arpeggio one will go into major, minor, diminished, and augmented arpeggios. But for now, we're not doing that. Oh, thank you so much. It's very sweet of you. Thanks, Dan. All right. So arpeggios outline the notes in a chord that other instruments play at the same time. We're going to play them individually to play an arpeggio. So if we're playing a major scale, we're going to do a major arpeggio from that major scale. We're going to take the 1st note of that scale, the 3rd note of that scale, and the 5th note of that scale. And if we want to round it out, we can add the 8th note of the scale. But once again, that 8th note is the same letter name as the 1st note of the scale. So we don't have to do that. But for fun right now, we are going to. So it's going to sound like this. But you could also just go. All right. So if we're going to do the major arpeggio, we're playing the 1st note of the scale, which is the 3rd fret on the E string. We're going to skip over that 5th fret on the E string. We're not playing that one because that's just the 2nd note. We're playing the 1st, the 3rd, and the 5th. So the 3rd note of the scale is that 2nd fret on the A string that we're playing with our pointer finger. And then we're going to skip over the 4th note of the scale, which would have been there. And we're going to play the 5th note of the scale, which in the G major scale is the 5th fret on the A string, also known as a D note, but we'll talk about notes in a second. So we've got, those are the 3 notes. So what I want you to do is memorize, once again, the finger pattern and the string pattern. So we started on our middle finger on a note. Then we went down a string and backward 1 fret. And that's why we started on our middle finger, was so that our pointer finger can get that next note. And then we're going to play our pinky on that same string that we played the 3rd note of the scale, but the 2nd note of the arpeggio. Whew, that's confusing. So let's see if we can say it a little simpler. And yes, this is basic music theory, so this is a good part to jump in on the lesson if you've been watching. That's basically what we're covering is the theory part of the lesson. So we started with technique, then we're doing some theory, and then we're applying that theory to make bass lines at the end of this. So that's gonna be the fun part. So the arpeggio pattern, you play a note on one string, you go down, and when I say down a string, I'm not talking about pitch. I'm literally talking about toward the floor. Sometimes I'll say it the other way around, so I just want to clarify. We're going from the E string to the A string, so from a thicker string to one thinner. So we start on our middle finger on the thicker string, then we go to that thinner string, backward one fret. So that would be, in this case, the second fret on the A string. And then our pinky is going to get the note it would be assigned to, which in this case would be the fifth fret note, also on the A string. So if you can remember basically what finger to use within your grid and what string to be on in relation to the first note, then that's a pattern that you can move around to anywhere, and you can play these different arpeggios. So let's play that one more time. Third fret on the E string with your middle finger, second fret on the A string with your pointer finger, and the fifth fret on the A string with your pinky. So get used to that pattern. So now we could move that pattern around. Like, let's just assign our finger to, let's just pick a random fret to start on. Let's say that we're putting our middle finger on the sixth fret. Well, we could do the same thing. We're still on the E string right now, but we're going to start on the sixth fret on the E string. Then we go backwards one fret and to one thinner string. And so that's going back with our pointer finger. And then now we're going all the way to our pinky, right? And remember, we're doing one finger per fret. So if the pointer finger is getting those fifth frets, then the middle finger will get sixth frets, the ring finger will get the seventh frets, and the pinky will get the eighth fret, because that's our current position. I think y'all got the idea now. I think I've said it about 100 times. Let me know if it's still confusing in the comments, and maybe I can figure out another way to clarify it. Okay, so that's the idea. And we can move this around. We could start on the A string, and then it's the same idea where you go backwards one fret into one string thinner, which is down physically toward the floor. So you can play that pattern anywhere. And depending on what what note name that you start on, so it's what letter. It's like, let's say we start on an E, and that's an E major arpeggio. If we're starting on a D, it's a D major arpeggio. If we're starting on a G, it's a G major arpeggio. But that pattern is a movable pattern that we can move anywhere on the E, the A, and even the D string. So you kind of get the idea that that's what we want to do to figure out to figure out how these patterns are movable. So now we need to learn a minor arpeggio, because we are going to build bass lines out of these arpeggios. I'm sure that you can kind of hear that this is a familiar sound. So I'm just teaching you the three notes. I guess earlier I said I was going to teach you the one on top. If you wanted to add the note on top, that would just be going down to a thinner string on the same fret as your pinky note, right? But when we're making lines out of this, we're not going to use that note, so that's why I'm leaving it out for now. Good evening. So I hope everybody's following along. If any of this stuff is confusing, please just let me know, and I can at least point you to the right videos. Once again, there's an arpeggio video that goes into this even further. But that's the major arpeggio, which would go along with a major chord. So if someone said, I'm playing a C major chord, you could find a C note, which happens to be the third fret on the A string, and then you could play a major arpeggio there, and it'll go along with that C major chord. Okay. But what if they say, I'm playing a G minor chord? Well, then you want to pick your notes from the minor scale. Oop. So you're going to play the, if we're doing G minor, we're going to play the third fret on the E string with our pointer finger, which means we're doing 3, 4, 5, 6. And we're going to use notes from that minor scale that we just learned. Only we're going to skip over some of those notes. We're going to play the first note of the scale again, the third note of the scale again, and the fifth note of the scale, this time pulling from the minor scale instead of the major scale. So Let's play the 3rd fret on the E string with our pointer finger. Then we're going to play our, we're going to skip over the 2nd note of the scale and go to the 3rd note, which happens to be our pinky note on the 6th fret of the E string. And then now we're going to move down to a thinner string. So those were both on the E string. Now we're going to move down to the A string, and we're going to play the 5th fret, which happens to be our ring finger note on the A string. So that is a minor arpeggio, and right now we're going to leave off the octave note at the end. We're just going to play those 3 notes because that's all we really need. All right. Good. I'm glad it's very clear. Awesome. Thank you for the feedback. So, so we do that, and we can move this pattern around as well too. So let's say we wanted to do a D minor chord. Well, we need to know that a D note is the 5th fret on the A string. But once we know that, we just put our pointer finger there. We play that pointer finger note. Then we go over to our pinky note, which is, once again, you just go, it's 4 frets in a row. So if your pointer finger is getting the 5th fret, then 1 finger per fret to get to your pinky. And then we have our ring finger note on the D string now, because we moved from the A string, which is where we were, to the D string. And once again, we can move this pattern anywhere starting on the E string, the A string, or the D string. So here's a G minor arpeggio. Then we can move up to an E minor arpeggio. We could do a C minor arpeggio, a B flat minor arpeggio. Just wherever we want to start the arpeggio is what it becomes. So that's that's the minor shape for the arpeggios. Now we've got major arpeggios and minor arpeggios. So that's kind of confusing. So I hinted at it a second ago, but now we need to finally learn some notes on this little instrument. So this is just a memorization thing. I'm just going to tell you the name of each note up to the 5th fret on the E and the A string to get you started. Now you can go in and learn all the notes on the whole U bass, but basically to play most functional lines, if you know the letter names from the open E string really up to the 6th fret on the A string, then you've got your starting points for all these patterns, and you can play a functional line for pretty much any song. You just might not be able to play specific bass lines that certain bass players play in songs, but you can play one that'll work with any song with that. Any pop song or anything that's not completely bass driven, if you're following along with ukulele player, all that stuff. So first, E, the open E string is an E note. Then if we play the 1st fret on the E string, that's an F note. Then we play the 2nd fret on the E string, that's an F sharp. The 3rd fret's a G. The 4th fret is a G sharp. And the 5th fret is an A. So the sharps have another name for those notes too. You could call this an F sharp, meaning you're going up from F. You could also call it a G flat. G flat. And flatting the note means subtracting a fret, and sharping a note means adding a fret. So each of those have 2 names, and that's kind of confusing. So for now, I'm just going to call them by the sharp names. Okay. So I'm going to go over them again really quickly. The E string, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, and then the 5th fret is A. And you can tell it's A because our open A string is also an A. And if you're in tune, they should sound like the same note. Okay, so now we're on the A string. Open A is A. Then 1st fret's A sharp. Then the 2nd fret's B. Then the next note's C. So in other words, we don't have a B sharp, or if we do, we call it C. Then we have a C sharp. Then we have a D. And I want to give you the 6th fret on this because we have every note in our musical alphabet except for we don't have a D sharp yet. So for D sharp, just play the 6th fret on the A string. All right. So I got to mention, this is kind of tricky. If you're starting your arpeggio patterns on open strings, it's a little tricky. So we may actually want to learn a couple more notes from here. Let's go down to the D string and learn open D is D. The first fret's D sharp. And then the second fret is E. So now we have an E that's not an open string, and that's kind of important. So that way we can do our major arpeggio and our minor arpeggio there. Okay. Oh, thanks. I have this tweet code. I thought it would be nice to look like a professor for all this teaching that we're doing. This is college level stuff. It's UBass 101. Welcome, class. Okay. Anyway, that's the notes from the open string to basically the 5th frets on the E, the A string, and a couple notes on the D string. All right. Well, I'm glad y'all are enjoying the lesson. Thanks so much for tuning in. We've got a little bit more to go. So now we've got enough options to kind of make a bass line. We haven't talked about rhythm at all, and today we're not really going to talk about rhythm. So you can vary up these lines by changing the rhythm, but that's just not something that we'll quite get into today. So now that we've got these notes, we're going to be playing a root 5th line, and this is like a country style bass line. You can also hear it in bossa nova. Once again, that's changing the rhythm a little bit of it. But the idea is we're going to use the root of a chord and the 5th of a chord. Now, what does that even mean, right? Well, the root of a chord, if someone says they're playing a C chord, C is the root. Even if it's C major, C is the root. If it's C minor, C is the root. And then the names of the other notes, like when I'm saying the 5th, well, the 5th is an interval, but all you really need to know about intervals right now is they come from scales. So if I say the 5th, I'm really talking about the 5th note of whatever scale you're in. So like, let's say you're playing a C major chord. Well, the 5th note of C major is our 5th. So if we were playing a C, we go up our scale 5 notes, C, D, E, F, G, and we end up on a G note. So if we were playing a 1-5 over a C chord, we'd be playing C, G. That's it. So it sounds like that. Or you can go from C down to the 5th note of the scale, meaning if we go up to G, or like, oh, okay, the 5th is G. Well, let's just bring the G down to the E string. There's another G on the E string. So we could go C down to G. But it's still going to the 5th note of the scale from the root note of the scale, which is the 1st note. So let's say somebody was playing a song and they're playing a C chord, a C major chord, an F major chord, and a G major chord. So C, F, and G. Well, first thing we want to do is find our roots for those chords. So we need to find a C on the U bass or bass ukulele. We need to find an F, and we need to find a G. So C, we went over, 3rd fret on the A string. F. So here's the thing about F. We may have to, when we do a major arpeggio later on, we may have to use an open string. So when you go backwards a fret and down, just remember that zeros count. Okay, but I digress. We've got our F down here. So that's the 1st fret on the E string. And then we've got our G, which is the 3rd fret on the E string as well. Oh, we forgot which thing. It's okay. It'll all be on the recording. If you have questions, like I said, once I get through to the end of this, I'll be happy to answer them for you. So if you make notes, you can write down things that are tricky for you, and then I can answer them at the end. And you might be answering someone else's question, so it's really helpful to do that. Okay, so we've got our root and 5th, right? So our root in the C chord is C, and then what we did to find the 5th is we either went to a thinner string, one thinner. So if I was on the A string, I'd go to the D string and up 2 frets from our root note. So go down to a thinner string and go over 2 frets, add 2 frets basically. So if you were on the 3rd fret, now you're on the 5th fret on the next thinnest string. Or you can find that 5th by going on the same fret to a thicker string. So if I was here, I could go up to here, and I say up here, I mean physically from the floor. And that's the fifth of C. Basically, they're both of those. Fifth of C is both G. It just depends on which G you want to play. So just looking at the visual pattern is kind of nice, because then you don't have to think about these notes, right? And I know I'm telling you don't have to, but don't get that confused with don't ever go back and learn the notes, because there are a lot of people that do. They learn a country line, and they play country for the rest of their life, and they never have to learn anything else other than what I'm talking about today. But you're shortchanging your whole musical knowledge and your ability to play other songs and to branch out from there. So this is really just a starting point to get you to be able to play songs. Please, please, please go back and learn all the notes and a little bit more theory behind it, like that major scale and all that stuff that we talked about. But functionally, you could get away with this, and some people have made a career using just this knowledge, basically. Okay, and maybe the scales too. They include the scales. So you can either go, for instance, from the 3rd fret to the 5th fret on the next thinnest string, or from the 3rd fret on the A string, going down to the, I said down this time, to the thickest, going to the thicker string, same fret. Okay, so you can either go boom, 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 or boom, 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 boom. You've heard both of those. Every Johnny Cash song, every kind of old country song, all of that, root fifth lines. Now, we haven't talked about walk-ups, which make it a little bit more exciting, but we'll get there. So that's our root fifth line. So we have the C chord, the F chord, and the G chord, and now we're going to play that country line on each one. So let's say that we stay on the chord enough to do our 1-5 pattern twice. So we can go boom, 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 boom. Now we're going to move to the next chord. We're going to F. Boom, 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 boom. Notice I can't go to a thicker string, so I'm forced to play up there, right? And then we could go to our G. So we just got to start on G. And then we could go back to C at the end. So let's see. Do I recommend barring? Oh, okay. So as far as barring goes, I think this is the question you were asking me about earlier. You can bar those. I think that you could also move your finger individually like that. The reason I wouldn't bar all the time is because if you have a whole lot of stuff going on in a song where you're barring the entire time, it will wear your finger out, because you'll be holding stuff down like 2 strings at a time, and after a while it could just wear you out. With the rubber strings, not as much as with the metal, but just something to keep in mind. With the country line, we don't really have to sustain the notes as long. They usually have space between them because you're imitating an upright, and the sustain, the way they used to record, wouldn't come through anyway. So all you hear is that with kind of space in between each note. So you have time to move your finger over, or you could bar. And barring would be if you want to play smoother, like if you want to not have any space between the note, then you basically push down 2 strings with 1 finger is what barring means. I know we're doing your first lesson, so if you may not want to do that. You may want to keep your fingers curved. It's just slightly better technique. But sometimes if you want stuff to be smooth, you got to break that rule slightly and bar to get some smooth transitions between notes. So that's a great question, Robert. I hope I answered it for you. All right, let's see. Oh, congratulations on your U-bass, JP. Awesome. Okay, so now we've got our root fifth line. So this would go along with somebody staying on the chords for this long. So I'm going to bring a ukulele out just for temporarily giving you an idea of how this would go along with somebody. They go, hey man, I'm playing a song. It's got a C chord, an F chord, and a G chord in it. You go, okay, cool. And so they're going, oh, it'd help if I tuned it. Sorry about that, guys. But basically, however long they stay on it lets you know how many times to do the country line or not. So let's say they count you in. Man, this is really out of tune. Note to everybody, tune before you play. Okay. I skipped over tuning on this. There's some videos on tuning though. Some good ones out there. It's really, really easy to do. I might go back and mention that kind of toward the end, but this will have tuning in it too. We'll talk about tuning the bass too. So let's say someone's like, it's a C, an F, and a G chord, and they go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Staying on each one for 4 full counts at a pretty slow tempo, right? As far as the way I'm counting. So then that means you'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Or you could do this for the C chord 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. And I'm gonna talk about what I'm doing too in a second. Okay, so first we're going to do the C chord root fifth twice. So we go root fifth, either going 2 frets over and 1 string thinner, or we could go same fret to a thicker string, right? Or then we go to the F chord, and here we only have the one option, so we're going to go 2 frets over and down to the thinner string. Then we're going to go to the G. Same thing, we only really have one option. And we do it the pattern 2 times on each one, and then we're back to the C chord. Or whichever one you want to do. So let's play the whole thing together. We're going to do 2 patterns on each chord. 1, 2, 3, 4. To F. To G. And back to C. Now we'll just do it the other way, where we're going from C to the same fret on the E string. 1, 2, 3, 4. C. F. G. Back to C. Okay, and so that little walk-up's from a scale. We talked about scales earlier, but we can get to that in a minute. I actually want to talk about making lines out of arpeggios first. I was actually teaching a student today, and we were talking about major and minor arpeggios, and you can kind of use them to create a very simple walking line that you can use over pretty much any jazz song that would normally have walking bass. And it worked really well over things like Autumn Leaves, and it worked really well over things like Fly Me to the Moon, which there are lessons on those songs elsewhere. And if you look in there, you'll see this pattern at least a few times happen in there. But let's say we were doing, we'll pick basically similar chords. Let's say we have some major chords and some minor chords. So why don't we do what's called a 2-5-1? I know that JP said, good old 1-4-5. And basically when he's saying 1-4-5, that thing that I just did a second ago was all in the key of C major. C was our 1. And if you count up the C major scale, C, D, E, F. F is our 4. C, D, E, F, 4th note of the scale. We just built a chord out of it. G is our 5. C, D, E, F, G, all in the key of C. So that's the idea there. Sorry, someone's calling me. But now we're going to do what's called a 2-5-1. Let's stay in the key of C. So if we're doing a 2-5-1, this would be our D minor chord. So we're going to go C, D, C, D. So D is our 2. Then G will be our 5. C, D, E, F, G. And so that's just going to be a G major chord. And then we're going to do C is our 1. So C major chord. So first what we want to do is we want to take these and figure out our arpeggios over each one of those. So if someone's like, hey, it's a 2-5-1 in C, that means it's a D minor chord, a G major chord, and then a C major chord. So for the D minor chord, we're going to do a D minor arpeggio, which means we're going to start on our pointer finger, if you remember that our minor arpeggio starts on the pointer finger. And we're going to start on a D note, which we had to find. Go back through here if you forgot how. It's going to be the 5th fret on the A string. Okay, so we play that note. And then we play our third of the arpeggio. So now this is confusing because we talked about the key we're in, but forget that for a second. We're just talking about now, if we had our D minor scale, we'd play, you know, the first note of the minor scale, the third note of the minor scale, and the 5th note of that D minor scale to get our arpeggio. So if you remember that pattern, then just disregard all that stuff. But if you don't, that's how we found it. So basically, we just play that. And then we're going to go back to the third of that chord, the third of that arpeggio, which is the third note of the D minor scale. So we go root, third, 5th, third. So we're just playing quarter notes here. If you know anything about rhythm, if we were patting our foot, you're just playing with your foot pats. Okay, so now that we have that D minor arpeggio, we're going to go to G, and we're going to do a major arpeggio there. I was about to go to this G. You could also go down to this G. Let's go down to this G for now, since that's what we know. We know the 3rd fret on the E string pretty well. So our major arpeggio, once again, we pull from the major scale. So we're thinking the G major scale temporarily because we're doing a G major chord. The first note of the scale, the third note of the scale, and the 5th note of the scale. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 3, 5. And then we're going to go back to the third note after that. 1, 3, 5, 3. So far, we've got our D minor chord, 1, 3, 5, 3, our G major chord, 1, 3, 5, 3. Once again, those numbers are the order that they are in the scale, has nothing to do with frets right there. Okay, so now we're on a C major chord next, right? Because we had our D minor chord, our G chord, and our C major chord. Okay, and let's do the C chord twice just because it's nice to have a 4-measure pattern that we're doing. So we'll go 1, 3, 5, 3, starting on your middle finger on C, and then doing that major arpeggio, going back to the note that you ended on, which happens to be the third of the chord. But if that's confusing, you could go first note of the arpeggio, next note of the arpeggio, last note of the arpeggio, back to the middle note of the arpeggio. Okay, so here's what it'll sound like all together, and then we'll play through it. So let's do it a little bit slower than that. We're gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. One more time. Let's do the whole thing again. Back to D, G, and C. And so that's basically a very, very simple jazz walking line. If you were to play that at like a jazz jam, people might look at you a little bit like, he doesn't really know how to walk, because most of the time walking is more about directionally leading into the next chord. So a lot of times we like using the notes from scales. So all of those chords, that D minor, that G major, and that C major, they're all part of the scale C major. So all those notes that we played are in this scale. So because of that, we can use the C major scale to fill in gaps in our walking line if we want to move more directionally to a note. So from D to G, we're not going to worry about this too much. We'll just do our normal arpeggio thing. But let's say we end up on this G down here that we know from that other song that we just did. This is a G, the 5th fret on the D string. But let's say we started there, and we realized, oh, well, that's the 5th note of the C major scale. Well, why don't we, since we're going to a C chord next, why don't we just walk down the scale to get down to C? And then you're on a C, and you can do your arpeggio again. So this is what I just did. D arpeggio, then G, and we're just walking down the scale to C. So if you know you're in the C scale, when I went to that G, notice I went to my pinky. You don't have to go to your pinky there, but you want to end up in the position to play the C major scale somehow. So let's say you do this arpeggio, and you hit the G like this, and you're like, oh, well, now I'm going to go down the scale. So you can do that. Okay, so that's the idea there. We could also do something where we do walking a little bit more than that. We could walk down from D. Instead of doing that D minor arpeggio, we could walk down the C major scale. You need to know that this note's in the C major scale in order to do that. So this might take a little more knowledge of knowing the note names of the scale so that you know you can go up the scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, or you can go down the scale, C, B, A, G, F, E. We had 2 lower notes, D, C, but we don't. So you could start on a D note and then go down the C major scale, D, C, B, A, and then you end up on G. So the point is we just want G to end up on that first note of that next measure, that next grouping of 4 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And then after that, when we get down there, we can do our arpeggio on that G chord, right? And then we can go to C. And when we're on C for 2 measures, we could really get away with walking up the scale. Now, I had to do something because I would have ended up on C too soon. So one thing you could do, you could repeat one of the notes to make sure that you end up on a C down there. Let me see if I can think of which note's best to repeat, just to give you an example. I think it'd be best to go, to really just go up the scale, skip over the C, go up to a D up here, which is 2 frets above that C down here. So you could go skip over C, and then you end up on the C again. Actually, I'm sorry, we're going to a D because we've already gotten through 2 measures of that. We could just go straight up the scale. We can then end on that D, walk down the C major scale to get down to G, and then walk down from G all the way down to C. So if you have certain chord progressions like a 2-5-1, you could literally start up high and just walk down the C major scale, and you'd land on the right notes at the right time. So it's kind of fun to do that. So let's say we're doing our D minor chord to our G chord to our C chord. Okay, well, I'm going to start on the D up here, and I'm literally just going to walk down the C major scale after that. So we got D, C, B, A. Now we need a G, G, F, E, D, and there we are at C. And then we can just kind of arpeggiate if we want to. So that's a basic idea of how we do walking lines. I know I skipped over some stuff in there. That's a little bit more advanced. It's not super advanced, but it's harder than the other stuff on this list. But that's just an example of where we can go from there. Another thing that we could do if we're not doing walking lines, let's say we're going back to our easier line of doing root fifth, root fifth. Well, if you do that, you can change the rhythm and you can get different things like, so first we got our country line. If you double each one with a certain rhythm, it sounds like a bossa nova. So those are some different things that you can do to get different feels with the same set of notes. If you take just an arpeggio, just those 3 notes, but you give it this rhythm, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and kind of has like an island vibe or a calypso vibe or something, or New Orleans vibe, just depending on where you are. So that's a lot of stuff there. Oh no, we're talking about bagpipes. I was worried y'all were talking about the audio on this video. Like, oh no, it's hard to hear. What is it? Somebody was talking about a homemade bagpipe thing. If people are bored enough, there was a video on this. I don't know if anybody else has seen this, but we're just going to take a little break from the bass playing for a second. Now that we've gotten through basically all that I wanted to get through today. But the homemade bagpipes, what they did was they took a garbage bag and recorders, and they taped the recorders to the garbage bags, and then they had like a straw attached to the garbage bag that you blow into, and then that inflated the bag, and that air blew through the recorders and made the worst sounding bagpipe you could possibly ever imagine. So I think the bagpipes can sound cool, but that was just really awful and hard to listen to. So I don't know the link to that, but you could check that out, and it gets a little crazy there. All right. So we got through it, and it took about an hour, which is about what I thought it would take. But basically, if you're wondering where to go from here, as far as changing stuff up with rhythm, I have another lesson called Island Strum Bass Lines. And the Island Strum Bass Lines gives you whole note lines, which is just playing the root note, right? So if we're playing a C chord, we're only playing the note C and just kind of holding it out. And then it goes to country lines, right? That we talked about, that root fifth. Then it talks about doing the same thing but changing the rhythm, and it goes more in detail into the rhythm for the bossa nova line, and it does that calypso island kind of thing, right? And of course, if it was minor, we just use that minor arpeggio. Okay, so there's some other videos on the playlist. There's how to learn songs on the spot. It talks a little bit more about if you're wondering about that root third, fifth thing, it explains it a little bit better and a little bit more in detail. So if that's still confusing, just check out that video. And then if you have questions, go ahead and let me know if you'll have some questions right now. It's a good time for them. For those that are still left on here, I want to thank everybody once again for tuning in and sticking with me through a very, very long lesson. I hope that you got something out of it. If you did, feel free to subscribe to the channel. I think I'm about to cross 4,000 subscribers. I'm going to check to see if it happened during the live stream, but that'd be cool if it did. Let's see what happens. Oh, it's refreshing. We are literally one away. I have 3,999 subscribers. So if you're watching and you're not subscribed and you want a cool story to tell people, you can be like, I'm his 4,000th subscriber if you subscribe now. All right. Let's see if we have any questions. So far, no questions. All right. And once again, Dan, if you're still here, I want to thank you again for the super chat. That's actually the first one I've ever gotten. So thank you so much. Oh, and hey, John, if you're still watching. Okay. I feel like I said, hey, John, 3 times. We had 3 Johns on this stream. It's a lot of Johns. While I'm waiting for questions, maybe I'll do what I always do and play my song Green Tea. I never get tired of it. I hope y'all don't ever get tired of it either. Oh, interesting story. Before my CD came out, there's a channel on this video where I'm actually wearing the same jacket, and I'm on top of a mountain, Kennesaw Mountain, and I am playing my upright bass and playing Green Tea on there. So this is the first time, probably, well, maybe not. It's one of the first times since then that I've been wearing the jacket and playing the song. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. You know what? I'm going to stop there and say, there I'm doing multiple things. I'm playing a melody, I'm playing a bass line, which is one of the bass lines we talked about. Right? So I'm playing that bossa nova line using the root and fifth, only I'm playing the fifth with open strings so that I have this hand free to do the melody too. So it's kind of cool. That kind of ties in. And then I'm slapping to add a little bit of percussion in there too. But yeah, it's kind of like combining all this stuff and then expanding on it a little bit by doing some melody stuff too. All right, let's see if we got any questions. All right, well, thanks for tuning in, Toby. I'm glad you got to catch one too. All right. Okay, so Robert, there's the major scale and the major arpeggio. Then there's the minor scale and the minor arpeggio. When I was doing the major arpeggio, I was pulling from the major scale and starting on my middle finger. When I was doing the minor arpeggio, because the minor scale starts on the index finger instead, and the reason why it does is because it reaches up to a note that the major scale doesn't, right? So we have to have our finger free for that fret. So when we're doing minor, we're going to start on our pointer finger. When we're doing major, we're going to start on our middle finger because we need this note instead of this note. So I'm pulling from the major scale pattern to do the major arpeggio. And I'm pulling from the minor scale pattern to do the minor arpeggio. And if I did use my pointer finger to do one of the major ones, it might have just been during a shift or something. But when I'm doing the root fifth line, if you're talking about the root fifth line, we don't need any of those notes, right? We just need the root and the fifth. So that third of the scale isn't in there at all. So therefore, there's no reason to do the middle finger pinky thing because we're not having to reach backwards for a fret at all. So on those, even though it was a major chord, since I'm only playing two notes, I'm able to start with my pointer finger. So it's all a context thing, basically. It's just about if you're playing major, you want to start on your middle finger most of the time. Now, if you're not doing the same pattern or you're playing the pattern in a different place, you could play a major arpeggio like this with a stretch. But then you're not staying in one position. You're actually shifting up to get that second note. So there are different rules around it, and they're expanding out of this framework that we're starting with. So it's kind of like the English language. You learn the rules, and then you learn the exceptions. If you learn all the exceptions first, it's like very confusing. This video is basically just a framework, and we're going to break a lot of these rules, right? Like keep your fingers curved. Well, if we're doing a barred thing, we're not going to keep our fingers curved as much. With the thumb and everything, like anchoring the thumb. Well, if we're playing slap, we're going to bounce the thumb off the string and not anchor it. So it's the same kind of thing where it's just an exception based on the context. Okay. Did that answer your question good, or do you have a follow-up question for it? And then let's see, who else we got here? If we use the pentatonic scale, we use the same patterns depending on if it's major or minor. Yes, because they come from, okay, so I could have talked about pentatonic scales on here, but yes, basically the pentatonic scale is the first, second, third, fifth, and sixth note of a major scale. So you can go 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and then you're back to your root. You know that my girl uses it. Or if you're doing the minor pentatonic, you're playing the first note of the minor scale, the third note of the minor scale, the fourth note of the minor scale, fifth note, seventh, and ending on the octave, which means we're skipping over the second note of the minor scale and skipping over the sixth note of the minor scale, but we want to use our same finger pattern. That's a great question, though. Now, here's the thing. You might see me play a minor pentatonic scale where instead of playing this note here, which is a B flat, I'm going to play the B flat as the first fret on the A string instead, and I might start on my ring finger so that I can get this cool slide from the fourth to the fifth note. instead of, it's the same set of notes, but because of the context, once again, I'm changing my finger position to kind of expand on that. So we learn our box shapes, we learn these little patterns within a grid, but then we go and we change it based on what we're playing and what kind of sound we want, what kind of effect we want. So it's very important to have the context. Hey, Tristan, let's see, we got any other questions here? So we got all the way through the lesson already. So if you have questions, just go ahead and ask away. And you can go back in once this posts and watch the rest of the live stream for the lesson. But I covered a whole bunch of stuff, from how to hold the U bass, basic plucking, basic fretting, some warm-up exercises, scales, really just one warm-up exercises, arpeggios, we just went over major and minor, learning the notes on the E and the A string up to the 5th fret, a root 5th line, arpeggio walking line, and just a little bit of where to go from here, which includes some walk-ups. I know some people were asking me about walk-ups, and a lot of it's scalar. You can also do chromatic walk-ups and stuff, but we don't really want to get into that on a beginner lesson. So let's see. I don't think I've heard of this U bass that you got, Tristan. Very cool. When you get that, make a video with it and share it with me, because I'd like to hear it. That sounds cool. I'm not familiar with the brand, I don't think. Okay. So does anybody have any other questions they would like answered today? Anyone dying to know something and not wanting to have to wait for a whole entire week? All right. Yes. So there's a whole bunch of stuff on this lesson, and I think it'll be a lot of fun to go back and listen to. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate y'all checking it out. And once again, I'm going to wait for a minute. I might play something real quick. Sometimes I like trying to write songs on the spot. That's a little bit harder. But usually when I do that, I do write them in G major, because it's an easy key to play a melody on while playing the other things. Because we have the G major scale that we can do really easily on one string. If you're curious about how to do that, in the major scale full lesson, I do and on the beginner playlist on my page, on my YouTube channel, you can learn how to do that, and then you can play melodies using the notes from the G major scale, and the bass lines you can play using the E string, and then the 5th of G is D, so you get to use the open D string too, and that's kind of the secret on how I wrote Green Tea. Right, I'm using the notes from the G major scale up here. I'm using the open D string a lot, and I'm using the G and the C note down here. So you see the melody is all on the G string on that first part. And then later on, I'm using what's called tenths to play the some of the other chords. And I'm using the open G string as the 5th of the C chord. So I'm actually using the G major chord, the C major chord, and the D major chord if someone was playing along with me. So that's just like a brief overview of all this stuff mixed together, and just kind of how you can combine it all to make something a lot more difficult than a beginner piece or something. But it's really not that hard when you have this foundation of the stuff we went over in this video to branch out from there, because then when you hear other people talking about it, you can kind of understand what they're saying, like, oh, the root and the 5th. Oh, you want me to play the 3rd and the 7th. Oh, is the 7th just the 7th note of a major scale? And they might tell you, oh, well, this one's actually pulling from a minor scale. And you go, oh, okay, cool. And all that stuff just comes back to this information. So that's why I picked these things to show you today. All right. Explain what double stops are. Okay. So double stops are basically playing 2 notes at the same time. So it's kind of like playing a chord on other instruments, only they're playing like a whole bunch of notes at the same time. If we just do 2 at a time, we can call it a double stop. So one example of a double stop is if you were to use one finger to push down 2 strings. Let's use it to push down the D and the G string at the same time. So you're pushing in the middle of the fret or slightly closer to here, so you don't have to push down as hard. We're barring the strings, meaning we're pushing down the D string and the G string at the same time, and you play both of those notes. So you could either pluck both those strings at the same time, you could strum them with your fingernail like a pick, or you could pop both of them, get a kind of an aggressive tone out of it. But that's a fourth interval, and that's an example of a double stop. Another example of a double stop is if you were to play like a root and a fifth at the same time on those strings. So like let's say we're playing here, we go down one string and up 2 frets. That's still a double stop. We're playing 2 notes at the same time. Tool has an intro on Schism that uses nothing but double stops. Right, until it does a pull off there, which we haven't talked about hammer-ons and pull-offs in here, but if you know what they are, then you know that it does that and it does a pull-off. I'm not going to do much more than that of that song, but hopefully that's a good example for you. So what made me want to play the U-bass? I actually got into this instrument in a fun kind of way. When I worked at a music store, there was always one on the wall, and I was just like, man, they're so expensive. You know, for what it is, why would it be so expensive? And I never even plugged it in to know how good it sounds plugged in. And I think they dropped the price after that, so they were a little bit more pricey when they first came out. And then I ran across somebody playing one at a gig, and there was one of my friends playing bass, and they brought that out, and I just thought it was like it sounded amazing through an amp, and I finally heard it, and they let me play it. They had a fretless rumbler, and that was the first one that I played, and it's like when you go through it, it has the same kind of bouncy effect that the intro to Chameleon has if you play on the rubber strings on a fretless, and so I just thought that was super cool, and so I had to I had to try them out every time I was in music stores after that. What really pushed me to get one is that I have a friend named Andrew that runs rockclass101.com. And he's also got a Rock Class 101 YouTube channel if you want to follow him. But I started doing some U-bass lessons for him after doing some ukulele lessons for his site. And we basically, I just ended up with that to do lessons on his site and got really into it. And that's when I did the Canon for U-bass. The first night I had it, I was just sitting there like, man, you can stretch so much further. You can do all these things. And so I just came up with that little arrangement and loved it ever since. It's just been a lot of fun. Great question. Thanks, Oscar. So let's see. I was telling other people that somebody probably during this live stream, if anybody has subscribed since then. Nope, no one has. It looks like it's still at 3,999 subscribers. So if you know anybody that wants to be the 4,000th one, this is their last chance because it'll probably happen between, now and the end of the day. So thank you so much for checking out the channel. And thank y'all so much for tuning in. I hope you've had a good time hanging out and learning all these beginner stuff. I highly recommend, even if you're not a beginner, going back and just skimming through the video and seeing if you ever missed out on some technique stuff. I talked about some things that not everybody talks about, like the floating thumb technique. So sometimes I'll anchor my thumb to the front of the body, and then sometimes I'll put my thumb on the E string to mute. But other times I'll have my thumb lightly touching the E string so that I can keep my hand in the same position as I move down to the other strings. And then my thumb is there to mute the strings as I go along. And so that way it allows me to keep my hand position kind of close like this so that I don't lose speed when I'm playing things a little bit faster. Awesome. Okay. Well, guys, thanks once again for tuning in. I appreciate all the wonderful questions y'all had, and I hope y'all learned something. And if you know anybody that needs the video, let them know there's a video that kind of covers a whole bunch of basics. I will see you guys next week. On Tuesday, I'll release my video of the week, and then I'll go live again next Saturday at 7. All right. Take care, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Glad I can help, Overly Creative. Take care, everybody.